In the summer of 1969, 500 million people watched Neil Armstrong step onto the moon. But what almost nobody knew, not even most Soviet citizens, was that the Soviet Union had its own cosmonaut, already selected, already training, waiting for a rocket that would never fly. This is the story of the moon landing that almost happened, the one the Kremlin tried to erase from history. For years, the Soviet Union denied it was even in a race to the moon. Officially, they claimed no interest in sending a man there at all. It was a lie, and it was a lie that would take nearly 2 decades to unravel. Behind closed doors in secret design bureaus scattered across the USSR, engineers were racing against a deadline they could not admit existed. Their goal? Land a Soviet cosmonaut on the moon before the Americans, using a rocket so powerful it defied anything built before. Its name was the N1. The N1 was a monster. Standing over 100 meters tall, it was designed to be more powerful than the American Saturn V. But where the Saturn V's first stage used 5 massive, well-tested engines, the N1 needed 30 smaller engines, all firing in perfect synchronization. 30 engines, 30 chances for something to go catastrophically wrong. The first launch attempt came in February 1969. Seconds after liftoff, a fire broke out in the engine compartment. The automated system shut down the engines and the rocket crashed back onto the launch pad, destroying itself in a fireball visible for miles. 5 months later, just weeks before Apollo 11 would carry Armstrong and Aldrin to the moon, the Soviets tried again. This time, the failure was almost unthinkable. A loose bolt fell into a fuel pump. The engine exploded. The N1, fully fueled, fell back onto its own launch pad and detonated with a force estimated at nearly the same magnitude as a small nuclear weapon. It remains one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in human history. The launch complex was obliterated. It would take nearly 2 years just to rebuild it. Somewhere in the Soviet Union, a cosmonaut was still waiting. His name has been debated by historians, but the leading candidate for that first Soviet lunar landing was Alexei Leonov, the same man who, years earlier, had become the first human to walk in space. Leonov had trained for a lunar mission that the public wasn't even told existed. He studied lunar geology. He rehearsed landings in simulators built specifically for a spacecraft called the LK lander, the Soviet answer to the American lunar module. It was smaller, riskier, and designed to carry just one cosmonaut down to the surface, alone. One cosmonaut, alone on the moon. No backup, no second astronaut waiting in orbit if something went wrong. If the ascent stage failed, there would be no rescue. It was a mission profile so dangerous that even some Soviet engineers privately doubted it should ever fly. But the N1 kept failing before it ever got the chance. In June 1971, a third launch attempt ended in disaster during stage separation, the rocket tumbling out of control before self-destructing. And in November 1972, 3 years after Apollo had already put 12 men on the lunar surface,
3, 2, 1, 0, all engine running. We have a liftoff on Apollo 11.
the Soviets tried one final time. The N1 flew longer than ever before. For nearly 2 minutes, it seemed like it might actually work. Then an engine ripped itself apart and the rocket disintegrated over the Kazakh steppe. 4 launches, 4 failures, not a single N1 ever reached orbit. By then, the race was already over. The Americans had already walked on the moon 6 times. The Soviet government quietly shelved the program in 1974, then went further. They classified it. Documents were sealed. Photographs were hidden. The very existence of a Soviet crewed lunar program was denied for years, even as engineers who had poured their careers into it were ordered into silence. It wasn't until the late 1980s and early 1990s, as the Soviet Union itself began to collapse, that the truth started to surface. Declassified documents revealed the LK lander. Photographs emerged of the N1 wreckage. Cosmonauts who had trained for a mission the public never knew about finally spoke, decades after the fact, about a moon landing that was real, that was planned in detail, and that came apart not because the dream failed, but because the rocket did. What makes this story remarkable isn't just the secrecy, it's how close it actually was. The Soviet space program had already achieved firsts the Americans hadn't. The first satellite, the first man in space, the first spacewalk. The infrastructure, the ambition, the cosmonauts, all of it existed. What didn't exist was a rocket engine test program with the rigor the mission demanded. Engineers were building 30 engines to fire in unison with limited full-stack testing on timelines dictated more by political pressure than engineering reality. In the end, the N1 wasn't defeated by American technology. It was defeated by its own complexity. Rushed under a deadline it was never allowed to admit publicly. Today, remnants of the N1 program are scattered in museums and storage yards across Russia. Some engines even sold decades later, quietly, to American aerospace companies studying their design. The LK lander that never made it to the moon exists as static museum pieces, a spacecraft built for a mission that was written out of official history almost as soon as it ended. Alexei Leonov never walked on the moon. He returned to Earth having already made history once as the first spacewalker and lived the rest of his life knowing how close he came to making it twice. Somewhere in that quiet decision to hide the program rather than admit defeat lies the real story of the space race. It wasn't only a contest between 2 nations, it was a contest between ambition and honesty, between the image a superpower wanted to project and the failures it was willing to bury to protect it. The Soviet Union didn't lose the race to the moon because they lacked the dream. They lost it because, in the end, the truth was easier to hide than the wreckage.